The rain slammed against the windshield so hard that Marcus Reed could barely see the road ahead, but he kept driving because late deliveries meant less money. And less money meant another week of overdue bills stacked on the tiny kitchen counter inside his apartment. His hands tightened around the steering wheel as thunder cracked across the Texas sky. The GPS on his phone kept rerouting because of flooded streets, and the cold fries smell filling the car made his stomach ache since he had skipped dinner again to save money for his mother's medication. Marcus was exhausted, soaked in sweat, and running on barely 3 hours of sleep, but he forced himself to stay awake because people like him never got second chances. One mistake could destroy everything. He grabbed the paper bag from the passenger seat when the app announced his final delivery of the night. The address appeared on screen, and his eyes widened immediately. It was one of the richest neighborhoods in Houston, a place where giant white mansions sat behind iron gates taller than most apartment buildings. Marcus let out a tired breath and whispered, "One more delivery, then I'm done." As he pulled into the neighborhood, every house looked like a private resort. Expensive cars lined the driveways, fountains sprayed water into the air, and security lights glowed across perfectly cut lawns. Marcus looked down at his faded delivery uniform and suddenly felt smaller than ever. His car engine rattled, embarrassingly loud compared to the luxury vehicles surrounding him. He parked outside an enormous mansion with golden lights glowing through massive glass windows. Music and laughter echoed from inside. Some kind of fancy party was happening. Marcus checked the app again to make sure the address was correct because the place looked more like a celebrity mansion than someone's home. He grabbed the catering bags and stepped out into the rain. Before he even reached the front door, two white men standing near the entrance looked at him with cold expressions. One of them wore an expensive gray suit and held a glass of wine in his hand. The other crossed his arms and scanned Marcus up and down like he was trash standing on the sidewalk. "You're late," the man in the gray suit snapped. Marcus tried to stay calm. "Sorry, sir. The roads are flooded downtown." The second man smirked. "You people always got excuses." Marcus froze for half a second after hearing those words, but he swallowed his anger because he needed the job. He had heard comments like that his entire life, sometimes direct, sometimes hidden behind fake smiles. Tonight he was too tired to fight anybody. "I just need a signature," Marcus said quietly. The man in the suit didn't take the bags immediately. Instead he leaned closer with disgust written across his face. "Don't drip water all over the floor. That marble costs more than your car." The men behind him laughed. Marcus felt heat rising in his chest, but before he could respond, a little boy suddenly appeared near the doorway, maybe 8 years old, blonde hair, blue pajamas. The child looked nervous. "Dad," the boy whispered, tugging the man's sleeve. "I don't feel good." The father barely looked at him. "Go upstairs, Ethan. The adults are busy." But Ethan didn't move. His small face looked pale. Marcus noticed the boy breathing strangely, almost like he couldn't catch air properly. The child suddenly grabbed his throat. Everything changed in seconds. Ethan collapsed hard onto the marble floor. The music inside stopped. People screamed. The father dropped his wine glass and rushed toward the boy. Ethan Marvis instantly recognized what was happening because his younger brother had died from severe allergic reactions years ago. The boy's lips were turning blue fast. "He can't breathe," Marcus shouted. A woman came running from the dining room crying hysterically. "His peanut allergy, oh my God." Panic exploded across the mansion. Guests stood frozen while the child gasped for air on the floor. The father searched frantically through drawers nearby. "Where's his epi?" Nobody knew. Marcus threw the catering bags aside and dropped to his knees beside the boy. "Call 911 now." The father looked stunned that Marcus was giving orders inside his own house, but fear had replaced his arrogance. Marcus carefully lifted the child's chin to open his airway. "Ethan, stay with me, buddy. Look at me." The boy's tiny chest struggled harder. Marcus remembered the emergency tricks doctors once used on his brother before the ambulance arrived. He stayed calm even while everyone around him panicked. The mother was sobbing uncontrollably. Guests shouted over each other. Someone knocked over a table. Marcus suddenly spotted a medical bag near the kitchen counter. "There!" he yelled. A woman grabbed it and tossed it toward him. Marcus ripped it open and found the EpiPen inside. Without hesitation, he injected the medication into Ethan's leg. Seconds felt like hours. Then, slowly, the boy inhaled. One deep breath. Then another. Color began returning to his face. The entire room fell silent. The mother collapsed, crying beside her son, while the father stared at Marcus in complete shock. Sirens echoed outside moments later as paramedics rushed into the mansion. They examined Ethan carefully before confirming the medication had saved his life. "If that injection was delayed another minute," one paramedic said seriously, "this could have ended very differently." The father looked at Marcus like he was seeing him for the first time. But before he could speak, another voice interrupted everything. "Step away from the child." 2 police officers entered the mansion. Marcus stood slowly, confused. The officer's eyes locked onto him immediately. Wet clothes, delivery uniform, black man standing in a rich white neighborhood during chaos. Their suspicion was instant. "What happened here?" the taller officer demanded. Before Marcus could answer, one party guest pointed toward him nervously. "That guy was on the floor with the kid." The officers moved closer, hands where I can see them. Marcus blinked in disbelief. "What, you heard me?" The father finally stepped forward. "Wait, the officer? He actually gotta!" But another guest interrupted loudly. "I saw him inject something into the boy's eye." The room erupted into confusion again. Marcus raised his hands slowly while anger burned inside him. "That was the EpiPen. I saved him." The officer grabbed Marcus aggressively. "Anyway, turn around. You're arresting him." The mother cried, but the officers had already forced Marcus against the wall. Phones appeared instantly as guests started recording. Marcus closed his eyes in frustration as handcuffs snapped around his wrists. The little boy suddenly sat up weakly on the couch and whispered with tears in his eyes, "Dad, he helped me." But the officers ignored him. Rain poured harder outside while Marcus was shoved toward the police car in front of dozens of staring rich strangers. The humiliation crushed him deeper than the handcuffs cutting into his wrists. He had just saved a child's life, yet somehow he still looked like the criminal. Inside the patrol car, Marcus stared through the rain-covered windows silently while memories from his life replayed in his head. Every job interview where people judged him before he even spoke. Every store where security followed him through the aisles. Every apartment application rejected despite perfect records. Every time his mother warned him to stay calm around police no matter what happened because one wrong move could get him killed. The officer driving glanced at Marcus through the mirror. "You've got lucky tonight." Marcus looked up slowly. "Lucky? If that kid died, this would look real bad for you." Marcus laughed bitterly under his breath because the man still didn't understand. At the mansion, Ethan's father stood frozen in the driveway watching the patrol car disappear into the storm. Guilt slowly replaced the fear on his face. His wife turned toward him angrily. "You let them take him," I tried to explain. "No, Richard." You hesitated. Richard looked down in shame because she was right. Back at the police station, Marcus sat alone under bright fluorescent lights while officers questioned him repeatedly. One detective kept asking why he was touching the child. Another asked if Marcus had medical training. They spoke to him like he was lying, even though the paramedicus already confirmed the truth. Hours passed. Finally, the station doors burst open. Richard stormed inside, soaked from the rain. His expensive suit was wrinkled now, his face pale with anger. Why is he still here? The officers looked surprised. Richard slammed his hand onto the desk. "This man saved my son's life tonight." Silence filled the station. The detective cleared his throat awkwardly. "We were just following procedure." "No," Richard snapped. "You saw a black delivery driver in my house and assumed the worst." Nobody responded. Richard walked toward Marcus slowly. For a moment, both men simply stared at each other. Earlier that night, one held all the power while the other stood soaked in rain holding food bags. Now guilt had shattered that illusion completely. "I'm sorry," Richard said quietly. Marcus looked exhausted more than angry. Richard continued, "I treated you horribly, and after what you did for Ethan, I should have stopped them immediately." Marcus said nothing at first. Then finally he asked softly, "Would they have arrested me if I looked like you?" Richard couldn't answer, because deep down, he knew the truth. The next morning, the story exploded across social media after several party guests uploaded videos of Marcus being handcuffed moments after saving Ethan's life. Millions of people watched the footage in disbelief. News stations replayed the clips nonstop. Public outrage spread across the country. One video in particular changed everything. It showed Ethan weakly pointing toward Marcus while crying, "He saved me." The internet erupted. By afternoon, reporters surrounded Marcus's apartment complex. Neighbors crowded outside, staring as news vans lined the street. Marcus hated every second of it. He never wanted attention. He only wanted enough money to survive. Inside the apartment, his mother watched television with tears in her eyes. "They're finally seeing who you are," she whispered. Marcus sat silently beside her. Then came the knock at the door. Marcus opened it carefully and froze. Richard stood there holding Ethan's hand. The little boy smiled shyly before hugging Marcus tightly. "You saved me?" Ethan whispered. Marcus felt his throat tighten emotionally. Richard looked around the tiny apartment and seemed shocked by how modest Marcus's life actually was. Old furniture, leaking ceiling stains, prescription bottles near the sink. "This is where you live?" Richard asked quietly. Marcus crossed his arms defensively. "Yeah?" Richard looked ashamed again. He glanced at Marcus's mother sitting nearby. "Ma'am, your son is a hero." She smiled softly. "I already knew that." For the first time in years, Marcus felt truly seen. But the story was only beginning. Within days, protests erupted outside the police department demanding accountability. Civil rights organizations demanded investigations into racial profiling. The officers involved were placed under review after body camera footage showed they ignored multiple witnesses defending Marcus before arresting him. Meanwhile, Richard couldn't sleep. Every night he replayed the moment he insulted Marcus at the front door. Every cruel word echoed louder now. The realization destroyed him because he finally understood how easily he judged someone based purely on appearance. During an interview with national television, Richard admitted publicly, "Marcus Reed saved my son while the rest of us panicked. I failed him before I even knew him." The interviewer asked carefully, "Do you believe race played a role in what happened afterward?" Richard looked directly into the camera. Yes, that single word shocked millions. Suddenly, Marcus became the center of a national conversation about racism, assumptions, and injustice in America. Invitations flooded in for interviews, podcasts, and television appearances. But Marcus rejected most of them because attention still made him uncomfortable. One evening, he sat alone outside his apartment when Ethan approached carrying a small envelope. "My dad wanted me to give you this." Marcus opened it carefully. Inside was a check big enough to erase every debt his family had. Marcus immediately shook his head. "I can't take this." Richard stepped forward from behind Ethan. "Please." "I didn't save your son for money, I know," Richard replied. "That's exactly why you deserve it." Marcus stared at the check silently. Richard continued, "But this isn't charity. It's gratitude." Marcus looked at Ethan smiling beside him and finally accepted. Months passed. Marcus's life slowly changed. He returned to school using the money to study emergency medicine because that night reminded him how much he wanted to help people. The story inspired scholarships from organizations across the country. Communities supported him. Strangers sent letters thanking him for showing courage despite humiliation. But the most unexpected change happened inside Richard. He started using his influence and wealth to support anti-racism programs in Houston schools. He publicly acknowledged his own prejudice during speeches and interviews. Some wealthy friends abandoned him afterward, but he no longer cared. One evening, Marcus stood outside a hospital after finishing training when Richard approached holding coffee cup. "You know," Richard said awkwardly, "Ethan still talks about you every day." Marcus laughed softly. "Kid talks a lot. He wants to become a paramedic now." Marcus smiled proudly. The two men stood quietly for a moment, watching ambulances arrive beneath glowing city lights. Then Richard asked the question haunting him for months. "How did you stay calm that night, after the way I treated you?" Marcus looked down thoughtfully. "Because a kid was dying," he answered simply, "and I didn't want him growing up without a father like I did." Richard felt tears fill his eyes. For the first time, he truly understood the size of Marcus's heart. Years later, people still remembered the viral video of the black delivery driver handcuffed after saving a rich white child's life. But Marcus hoped they remembered something deeper too. He hoped they remembered how fast assumptions could destroy innocent people, how easily fear mixed with racism could turn heroes into suspects, and how humanity mattered more than pride, wealth, or skin color. On the anniversary of that stormy night, Marcus visited Ethan's school career day wearing paramedic gear. The children crowded around him excitedly while Ethan proudly introduced him as his hero. Marcus looked around the classroom full of young faces from different backgrounds and smiled. Maybe the world was changing slowly, maybe not enough, but change had to start somewhere. And sometimes it started with one exhausted delivery driver standing in the rain, choosing kindness in a moment where hatred would have been easier.